Well, everybody, thank you for coming. Today we're going to talk about funeral homes in Franklin. All two of them. Had to get different sources of information. Franklin Register was the town's first newspaper. Then the Franklin Sentinel took it over around 1878 or so. They went for about 100 years. Then Stanley Chilson provided a wealth of information, all his movies and everything. You'll see a lot of pictures from those. The Sanborn Fire Insurance maps provided me with a lot of information too. And then personal pictures and postcards. And Charlie and Sean O'Terry gave me a lot of good information too. And I got in touch with Jim Ginley, and I talked to him, and he gave me some good information too. So, pretty good. I always like to give a shout out to the Franklin Museum, the Historical Museum. They do a really good job over there, and it's a really good place to go if you haven't been. Yep, Jen, you know that, yeah. Yep. Now, there's different terms that we use when we talk about funeral directors. There's funeral directors, morticians, embalmers, undertakers. So which one is preferred? They all mean about the same, except for one thing. Not all funeral directors are embalmers. It takes two different certifications to be either a funeral director or an embalmer. And of course, nowadays, a lot of them are both. But generally, a lot of funeral directors do prefer undertaker. So we'll call it undertaker. Now, who's responsible for embalming a body? Well, generally, a lot of funeral homes are small, so the person who usually embalms is the director. But all funeral directors are, they're not all embalmers, as I said. Now, embalming is not something that was really common until around the time of the Civil War. Apparently, what was happening was the Northern soldiers, when they died, their bodies had to be shipped to the South. And the ones that died in the South had to be shipped to the North. And that's when embalming kind of really came into its own. But it especially became important when Abraham Lincoln died, because they wanted his body to be preserved for the train trip to Illinois from Washington, D.C., and that was a good week or so. So they wanted to make sure that was done. So embalming really started to become fashionable back then. So. Now, funeral homes located in residential zones. I only found this out recently. Charlie was telling me that if a new funeral home is established, it has to be done in a commercial zone, because if it's in a residential zone, if it closes, they'll never be able to use that home as a funeral home again, not even for one day. So that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if if Ginley's is in a residential area or not. Charlie, I think you said yours is in a residential area, right?
Yeah. Cemeteries are the same way. Cemeteries are always located in a residential area.
Right. Right. Exactly.
Residential area.
Right.
Union Street Cemetery.
Yep.
Residential area.
Exactly. All the residential areas. Yep.
Cemetery cannot be located in a commercial zone.
Right. So cemetery cannot be has to be in a commercial zone then, right? Very interesting. Now we have the term coffin or casket. Yeah, technically a coffin is shaped, the typical hexagon shape, while a coffin is rectangular in shape. And generally today we use the term casket as the choice of the one we choose. So. Now, how were funerals held before there were funeral homes? I think we have relatives that know that the bodies were laid out at home. There were no funeral homes until the early 1900s, as we'll talk about. But then there were undertakers in Franklin, and we're going to mention them in a minute. They had a place of business where they worked, and that's where they did the embalming. And then in some furniture stores sold caskets, so they would get them and they would bring them to the home if that's where they wanted to be laid out. And then on the day of the funeral, either go to the church or the cemetery. So that's the way it was done. What did the early hearses look like? Well, this is one that is unbelievable. There's a guy who lives in North Attleboro, he's a good friend of ours. He recently bought this. He went out to the Midwest, I think it was, and he bought this thing. And it was in pretty good shape when he got it, but he's a body man, and he really, unbelievable, took good care of it. It's called a Buick Byzantine Sayers and Scoville hearse. And look at it. This thing is so rare. It's only about, I think there's only about 10 of them back in the country. No, how many? In the world. Okay, yeah, in the world. And of those, this is only what, one of three, I think, that's in original condition.
Well, one of them is in the museum.
One's in the museum.
The other one they can't find.
They can't find- yeah, it's unbelievable. I could show you pictures of the inside and everything, but he's got a casket in there, like an old-fashioned casket with this big skeleton coming out of it. He's got a sense of humor. The guy that he dresses up with a little top hat. It's not a real tall top hat. It's a short hat, and he's got the sunglasses on, the vest, and everything. Really, really played the part. He really looked good. So yeah. So who were the first undertakers in Franklin? Now, what I do is I went back to all the newspapers, and I look at advertisements. That's probably about the best way to figure out who was undertakers. Probably one of the first advertisements that I was able to find was this guy named Henry Bemis. He was an undertaker. Main Street. Now, I'm not sure exactly where on Main Street he worked, but he sold coffins, caskets, and furnished to order. Bodies preserved on ice if desired. Everything requisite for funerals furnished on order. So, 1873, that's the way it was done.
Nice.
And then George Fuller. Now, this is Central Street. Now, Central Street became East Central and West Central in 1913, but it was one street, Central Street, back in those days. And that would be the future Alpine Row. It's not today it's Alpine Row, but it was just a road back then. This is also 1873. There was a building on the corner. It was formerly known as the Morse Straw Shop Factory. It was owned by Aaron Hartwell Morse. But that's where George Fuller had a furniture business and an undertaking business. Okay? And Aaron Hartwell Morse was the guy that owned it. And we're going to hear more about Aaron Hartwell Morse in a few minutes. He owned the Morse Block, the Morse Opera House. Remember the Morse Theater? Some of you probably remember the Morse Theater before it became the Franklin Cinema. And there was even a garage over here. Horace Morse ran it. In fact, this house right here is where Aaron Hartwell Morse was living until 1892 when he built a new house, and we'll talk about that one. And here's some of the advertisements for George Fuller. I blew up the parts of coffins and caskets over there. So he not only sold furniture for the living, he sold furniture for the deceased. So of all sizes, always on hand, of the very best quality and finish, and caps and shrouds based on furnishings at the shortest notice. Call and see for yourself. They didn't call on a telephone. There was no telephone, so just call and show up. So that was that. That was also 1873. And then a guy named T.H. Trout took over that business. And in 1883, he took on a partner named Robert L. McPherson. He took him on as a partner. The advertisement on the right shows that's where they were doing business, in the Morse's Block. That was the building we just talked about. So the new undertaker, having had 20 years of experience as an undertaker, offers his services. So, bodies preserved in ice or embalmed when desired. Interesting.
Gerald,
Yes?
you said in ice. Is it on ice?
Yeah, no. Well, this one is in ice, but I think the other one said on ice, but yeah, maybe it's on ice. Yeah, in ice, on ice. They used ice. Now, Robert L. McPherson. As I said, this is where he was there at that time. In November, he bought the business from Trout in September. But then in November, 1 month after he bought the building, it was destroyed by fire. The thing just burnt down. I'm pretty sure the other building next to it also burnt down. Big, big fire. Now, T.H. Trout, he was living in the apartment on the 3rd floor, discovered the blaze when he smelled smoke. So he and his family got out. So there was an article in the Milford Journal that said because the blaze was so unbelievably big, they could see it from Milford. Now, I'm thinking Milford and Franklin. That's pretty far. But when you think about this, back then there was no electricity in town, so there was no lights. So today we have light pollution at night. It's always bright somewhere. But back then the darkness must have been unbelievable. So if it was not a moonlit night, maybe they could see a glow off in the sky, whatever. So that's probably what they meant. But then the article said, a pin could be seen glowing on the Main Street sidewalk. No, I'm not going, no. They might have seen the glow, but they didn't see a pin on the sidewalk. No, I'm sorry. Anyway, I thought that was interesting. So here's a Sanborn fire insurance map from 1884. There's Cottage Street, and there was a stable, a horse stable in the corner before the Morse Opera House block got built. But across the street was the undertaker. The arrow's pointing to where Robert McPherson moved his business there after the fire. And then those two squares, the one on the bottom is where the fire was. And I'm pretty sure that second building also burnt as well, because it doesn't show up here now, so it's probably a safe assumption. Now here's a really cool picture. This was taken from Alpine Row, looking towards the Morse Opera House block. And that arrow is pointing to the building where McPherson moved his business to. But what's interesting is you can see that the fire happened in the corner, and then the building next to it. And you can see the Morse Opera House block. That was in the process of being built. It was around 1886, later in 1886, that it was completed. So that tells me that's about the time frame for this picture. The guy that's in the middle of the thing, I gotta believe that's Aaron Hartwell Morse. I mean, he looks very well dressed. It was his property. He probably figured, oh, I'll be there for the picture. So I think it's a safe bet. And here's another picture looking from East Central Street, and there's that same building. And now you can see that the block has now been built up. The future Franklin Furniture Building that's there now, whatever. You see the railroad, the streetcar tracks tells me that's after 1900. So that picture was after 1900. But it shows that building, so.
What is the business up in the corner?
Okay, let's see.
It's the right-hand corner.
Right there?
No.
Down here?
Top right-hand corner.
Oh, top right-hand corner? Yeah. That was torn down about, 15, 20 years ago. But that's where Franklin Furniture was. Do you know, have you been in Franklin long enough to know where Franklin Furniture was? Yeah. Some people moved to Franklin recently, so. Yeah, that's where the Franklin Furniture Building was, yeah. Yeah, Freddie Saltman. Oh,
I
yeah.
got a deal for you.
He was something else. He extended credit before credit was fashionable.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
He was a good guy.
He really was. Yeah, very, very nice man. Yeah. McPherson, the undertaker. A full line of caskets, coffins, bum, bum, bum. Okay. Bodies preserved in ice or embalmed. 1884. Yeah. And that's when he was still doing business after the fire. So he's in the different building. Then in roughly around 1890, they constructed that building on the corner of Alpine Row and East Central Street, and that's where Franklin Furniture was eventually. But in 1890, it was Alfred Farrington established a furniture store there. And at the same time, he took on Robert McPherson as a partner. And so McPherson and Farrington, a new firm at the old stand, meaning the old location. So they've entered into a partnership for carrying on the furniture business and in the undertaking business as well. And then, around 1896, this advertisement said Farrington and Gushy. So it says successors to McPherson and Farrington. So at some point by then, McPherson had moved on, and don't know where he went from there. And Gushy was now the new partner. And then Farrington and Gushy, in 1897, Farrington and Gushy had made for them somebody made them a nice undertaker's wagon by Medfield Parties, and it was finally equipped for the needs of their establishment. So. And then a guy named Leslie S. Wiggins was, in 1907, had joined the Farrington establishment and had recently passed his exam to become an embalmer and received his diploma. So Leslie S. Wiggin, and as we're going to see in a few minutes, Wiggin Funeral Home, he established that. So in 1908, he was the assistant undertaker. He was awarded a prize of an Esco non-corrosive needle worth $10 for having given the 5th best description of the article in the catalog of the Embalmers Supply Company considered best adapted for getting business. Charlie, you were saying that business is still in business, right?
Yes, they are.
Yeah.
That's what ESCO stands for, Environmental Supply Company,
Exactly, right, yep.
and they're still in business.
Still in business, wow. That was 1908, so. Now in 1913, the Farrington Furniture Store was sold to a guy named Harry Davis and a Mr. Saltman. Now this would be Isidore Saltman, the father of Freddie Saltman. And but they were going to name it Boston Furniture. But then I saw advertisements later in the year that said it was Franklin Furniture. So at some point, they changed it to Franklin Furniture. Wouldn't make sense to keep it as Boston Furniture. You're in Franklin. So, and then Leslie Wiggin, he was working for them as the undertaker. He went off on his own, and he conducted that personally. And when we get to the Wiggin Funeral Home, we'll talk about that. Keefe Funeral Home, Thomas F. Keefe. Now, Thomas F. Keefe, I remember working in the diner. He'd come in, nice man, and he'd say, "I want a couple of coffee." Cute guy, really was. So he established a Thomas F. Keefe Funeral Home and his insurance company in 1913. But before that, he worked on a laundry. There was a laundry on East Central Street. In fact, the arrow is pointing to the Waterman Laundry. The building directly next to it was where Mr. McPherson was doing his business as the undertaker. Then on the other side of that was the Franklin Furniture Building. So, but this is where Waterman Laundry, and Tom Keefe started there working in that laundry.
Looks so nice with all those awnings.
Yeah, oh yeah. In fact, now this one, you can see Depot Street. Those awnings are fairly new because that building was only built in 1889, and this is 1908. So those awnings are about 12, 15 years old. But yeah, they had all those awnings back in those days. So according to the Franklin Sentinel, Mr. Keefe opened the modern laundry in the Jenks building at the foot of Depot Street. And the arrow's pointing to that building. And then I really zoomed in on it, and you can see the detail there. And if you look really carefully up on the roof, it says laundry. So I caught that. Wow, that's pretty cool. That Jenks building, it's also known as the Blackmar building. If you, when Scott Mason's diorama of the railroad area, he actually shows that Blackmar building as part of his diorama. And in a couple of months, when they bring it out for display again, you can see it. But that was that building. Actually, we'll see a picture later on that'll show it clearer. So, yeah. Now, in 1913, Tom Keefe was living on West Street, 47 West Street. And as you can see, he was doing business in the modern laundry at 1 Depot Street. In 1910, he married Mary Buckley, and they took up residence, well, at some point on 47 West Street. And then in 1913, he's studying at the New England School of Anatomy and Sanitary Science in Boston. And at that point, he established his funeral service, but he was not living on Cottage Street yet. We'll see that in a minute. And then the undertaking business, which had been carried on in the past under the name of Keefe and McGinn, will hereinafter be known as Thomas F. Keefe. He was formerly of the Modern Laundry. So at that point, he was on his own now, he had his own business. And then in 1918, he bought the home of Mrs. A.J. Riley at 33 Cottage Street. And he would take up residence there, and he would operate his business there. And he also continued to operate his insurance business there, too. Now, in 1937, Stanley Chilson took movies of downtown Franklin, and I happened to catch this. The gentleman on the left is Solon Abbott, Dr. Solon Abbott. In fact, my parents bought his house on Dean Avenue in 1949. But the guy on the right is Thomas F. Keefe. Yeah. And then in 1944, big announcement in the paper that the funeral home is being taken over by Edward J. Mulvaney of the time. Yep. And it was continued to be known as the Keefe Funeral Home with Edward Mulvaney as the proprietor, registered embalmer, and funeral director. So they make that distinction. Yep.
I love the telephone number.
Oh, yeah, 11. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, that obviously when phone numbers were first being established, phone number 1 was on Cottage Street. There was a woman named Edna Morrissey back in the 60s that had that number 1. But the rectory's got 20. So, And then when they went to dial service in 1961, it became 528, 0011, 0020, 0001, whatever.
Yeah, 33.
Yeah, 33. Oh. Yeah. So there's that. And then here's a typical ad from the 1950s, Keefe's Funeral Service, within the means of all. Edward J. Mulvaney, proprietor. Yeah. Still 11. Yeah. Now the Pizzini Funeral Home. In 1961, Fred L. Pizzini Jr. purchased the Keefe Funeral Service on Cottage Street, and he renamed it the Pizzini Funeral Home. Yeah. Now, Mr. Pizzini was a 1943 graduate of Franklin High and the New England Institute of Anatomy and Sanitary Science in Boston. He expanded the funeral home building to almost twice its original size to increase the annual volume substantially. And music was a very significant part of Fred's life. He was proficient in playing the trombone, saxophone, the organ, the accordion, and he played with many area bands too. Yeah. And then in 1976, the Folsom Funeral Service purchased the Pizzini Funeral Home and renamed it Pizzini Folsom Funeral Home, with Charles F. O'Terry being named director. And Mr. O'Terry, who was an employee with the Folsom Funeral Service at that time, moved from Norton to Franklin with his young family, and they lived directly across the street when that house became available for purchase. And Charlie is seen in the picture with his daughter. They were doing a time capsule in 1978, and that's his daughter, Michelle. I think you said your wife's in the background too, Charlie? I think.
Yes, and Esther Lobatier is.
Esther Lobatier, okay, yep. Yep. So, now, Charlie was born in Newton in 1964, graduate of Newton High School. He was a valedictorian. Good for Charlie, that's great. Yep. He received his funeral service education at the former New England Institute of Anatomy and Sanitary Science. He served in Vietnam for 18 months and was assigned to the Graves Registration Unit at the 8th Field Hospital, where he was the non-commissioned officer in charge. And he was awarded the Army Commendation Medal for meritorious service. Thank you for your service, Charlie.
I'd do it again tomorrow.
I know you would, and so would I. Yep. And then it became the Pizzini Folsom Funeral Home in 1976 with Charles F. O'Terry, director. And then in 1978, they had the big parade, but they had a breakfast at the country club, and some people were coming in. I just happened to catch this picture. Charles F. O'Terry Funeral Home. Now in 1986, I believe it was, right, Charlie?
Yeah. I brought my partners out.
He bought your partners out. He renamed the funeral home the Charles F. O'Terry Funeral Home. But he also referred to it as the Franklin Funeral Home because he wanted to maintain a connection with the local community. You know, you got Franklin Furniture, the Franklin Lumber, Franklin Ford, Franklin Pizza. So Franklin Funeral Home. So, yeah. And then in 2000, Charlie's son, Sean, became a licensed embalmer and became fully engaged in every aspect of the family business, at which time the funeral home was renamed the Charles F. O'Terry and Son Funeral Home. Now, Sean graduated from Franklin High School in 1990 and obtained his apprenticeship license in June of 1990 at the age of 17, one of the youngest ever in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to do so. He frequently assists funeral homes with embalming and funeral directing. He also manages the day-to-day operation of the company's livery service. So, Wigan Funeral Home. You probably recognize that building. It's over in the corner of East Street and West Central Street. Yep. And I can remember years ago, yeah, there was a door right behind that sign on that, where the bump out, and that's where the caskets used to come out. I remember that. I see some Stanley Chilson films showing that, but then eventually they just came out the front door. So, but that's where the Wigan Funeral Home was.
Joe, wasn't Pete O'Brien involved in there?
Peter O'Brien, right? He was the manager for many years.
Yeah.
And actually, you're going to hear from a few other people that managed it too. But yeah, Peter O'Brien was for many years. Yeah, yeah. He was. I guess he was quite a. He was a character. Yeah. I don't know if you told me a story about him, and I don't know if we want to share that or not. About the firefighters, but no, maybe.
Because the fire department, the fire station was right across the street.
Right.
And Pete O'Brien would pull in with the hearse.
Yeah.
They said, Pete, who do you have? Buy a newspaper.
Buy a newspaper.
Never tell them who he is.
That's great. Unbelievable. So in 1923, through the agent Harry Simon, Leslie S. Wiggin bought Dr. Green's house at the corner of East Street and West Central Street. So Dr. Green, now there was a Dr. Green on Dean Avenue, Dr. Harold Green, probably safe to assume it's him. And as we'll see in a minute, Leslie S. Wiggin was either doing business or living at 20 Dean Avenue, which was Dr. Green's house on Dean Avenue, 2 houses up from where I used to live. But he also had the funeral home at 5 East Street. So my educated guess is that he was living on Dean Avenue, probably even embalming him there, and then moving him over to the funeral home. I'm not sure about that though, but definitely had the funeral home on East Street and had some connection to 20 Dean Avenue. But in 1942, he had a connection to 29 Dean Avenue, which was across the street, where that's the same building. Those of you might remember Duke Yadicinia had Vet Med Supply Company. Duke lived in that house. When they moved to that house, I was told by one of the family members that there was things in the back there, in the back of the room, that looked like some embalming had taken place. Maybe there was equipment left over. So I'm guessing that Leslie Wiggin also did embalming there, and he still had the funeral home too. So that's what I saw, and I presented. So. And then this advertisement showed the Roberts Funeral Home was doing business at 131 Main Street. That's where Ginley's is today. So at that time, the Wiggin Funeral Home was run by a guy named James N. Blanchard. He was the licensed funeral director of the Wiggin Funeral Home at that time. And he was going to purchase that property and move the Wiggin Funeral Home there. But the deal never went through, and Wiggin continued on over where they were, and the Roberts Funeral Home continued on as well. And Peter O'Brien was still was running the Wiggin Funeral Home now at that point. And Wiggin Funeral Home, 1966, and then there's a picture of Peter O'Brien. He retired in 1970, at which time the funeral home closed.
He died in
71, right, yep. The Roberts Funeral Home. Now, that's on the corner of School Street and Main Street. That's where Ginley's Funeral Home is today. But there was a big straw factory there at that time. The Bassett Woodbury and Company straw goods manufacturers, a big, big factory. And this is the 1889 Sanborn Fire Insurance map that shows that. And then I was able to get a hold of this. There's a picture of the straw factory. Now you look at that church and you're probably saying, oh, I remember that church. No, you wouldn't remember that church because that burned down in 1886. What you will remember, though, is the replacement, the Grace Universalist Church. That's the one we remember. And that was torn down in 67 to make way for the Dean Library. But that church was built in the 1870s, and burned down in 1886, only 10 years later. So, beautiful building, though. But anyway, there's the straw factory that was there. Yep. Anyway. And then, in 1892, Aaron Hotwell Morse constructed this home on Main Street. That's where the factory once stood. I think we recognize that building. Now, he died 3 years later, in 1895, and his widow continued to live there until they sold the house to George F.S. Singleton in October of 1900. And then, unfortunately, during the Depression, 1936, the house went up for auction, and all the belongings and everything. So, unfortunately. And a guy by the name of Dr. Chester Goodenough bought it. And the article on the right was from 1946, kind of looking back. And so I'd mentioned that he was the guy that bought the house. And then recently it had been tenanted by the Roberts Funeral Home. And then this is that other clipping that we had talked about, that Mr. Blanchard was going to buy it, but then the deal fell through, or it just didn't go through with it, or whatever. Then it became the DePardo Funeral Home. According to the Franklin Sentinel, Egidio DePardo of Woonsocket, who had recently purchased a large estate that was formerly the Roberts Funeral Home, would purchase an ambulance for the Franklin police. He would house the ambulance at the Main Street home, where it would be available to the police at all times. And then the advertisement on the right shows the DePato Funeral Home. So, but apparently it wasn't really strange for funeral homes to have ambulances, huh, Charlie?
It's very common.
Very common, huh?
Rogerio in Milford, he had a number of ambulances.
Yeah, because if somebody died, bring them right to the funeral home. Yeah, great. Then the Jackson Funeral Home. Walter Jackson, yeah. In 1954, Walter Jackson took over the DePato Funeral Home and renamed it the Jackson Funeral Home. And that picture was from 1978, during the celebration there. Now, he continued to operate it until 1984, when it was taken over by James P. Ginley, who renamed it the Ginley-Jackson Funeral Home. And in later years, he changed it to Ginley Funeral Home. And the Ginley Funeral Home. Today, the Ginley Funeral Home continues to be operated by James P. Ginley. He was raised in Walpole and attended public schools there. He graduated from the Savarian Brothers High School in 1968 and the Boston College in 1973. During his college years, he attended the New England Institute, where he graduated with high honors in 1972. He's been a licensed funeral director since 1973, and he owns both the Ginley Funeral Home of Franklin as well as the Ginley Crowley Funeral Home in Medway, which he purchased in 1996. Boyertown Burial Casket Company. How many remember that? Yeah. Who remembers who other than Charlie, who ran that? John Hill, right. Yeah, that's right. We graduated with his daughter, Joni Hill. Yep, John Hill.
He was a character too.
He was quite a pool player. In fact, I was told he played pool with Willie Moscone at one point. Yeah, I don't know if it was an exhibition thing or he just happened to play pool with him, but he actually played pool against Willie Moscone. So, wow.
What years was that the casket company?
Well, I'm guessing around the 40s, I think. And Charles, do you know?
I think around 74, 75.
74, yeah. Yeah, I really couldn't find too much information. The best I could do as far as a picture was show what's there today.
Ray, what's his name?
Ray Brown.
Ray Brown tire store.
Oh,
Tire store.
right. Yep. Okay. Yeah, and you're saying a lot of the funeral undertakers would bring their people over there to pick out caskets. Probably a good display there. Yeah. Any questions? Yes.
I can remember when Wigan Funeral Home had a flower car.
A flower
I was
car.
in the 4th grade and the flower car drove by. I was at Horace Mann.
Oh, wow.
The flower car.
Right. Yeah, she was at Horace Mann School, and of course the flower car would go by a lot. Yeah. That's interesting, yeah.
Like Cadillacs converted into an El Camino.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
They were pickup body. I don't know. They were a beautiful vehicle.
Probably should have called it an El Catalado. I don't know. Anyway. Any other questions or any comments or no? Oh, yes.
Other than the director and the embalmer,
Yeah.
are there other positions in funeral homes that people don't require that medical type certification? Is embalming or
I don't
education
know.
in a funeral home?
You're sitting next to a guy that's an expert on this.
Well, in Massachusetts, you have to be a licensed embalmer before you can become a licensed funeral director.
Ah, okay.
Whether you never embalm a body in your life after that
Yeah.
doesn't matter.
Ah,
You have to be a licensed embalmer before you can become a licensed funeral director.
huh. Okay.
So once you're a licensed funeral director, then you can make arrangements and do things like that.
Right.
So there are positions now where you can hire people to do like pre-arrangements, make removals, and things
Right.
like that.
Okay.
But
Are these the people that we see typically at a
yes,
funeral?
yes.
Yeah.
But to own and operate a business,
Yeah.
you have to be a licensed embalmer.
Right. Ah, okay. Interesting.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
How does one think about when you're young that you want to be an undertaker?
Yeah, that's
I
good.
always wondered that.
Well, I'm sure everyone has a different reason or a different way or a different calling. In my particular instance, I was 12 years old in 1957 when my grandmother died.
Huh.
And as most Italian people would know, the grandparents lived in the same house
All right.
with everybody, and we grew up and everything like that. And my grandmother had been very ill for a long time. And I could see her declining and declining and declining. And in September of 1957, she had to go to Newton Wellesley Hospital. I never saw her again. I kissed her goodbye, nodded her goodbye.
Oh, wow.
But I couldn't visit her because 12-year-old children couldn't visit their grandparents. Anyway, make a long story short, she died. Her wish was to be buried from the house.
Oh.
So we engaged a funeral home, DeVito, in Watertown, who my father was very friendly with, whose son owns the place on Union
Jimmy D.
Street.
Jimmy D.
Jimmy D's.
Oh.
His father and grandfather were funerarians.
Huh.
Okay. So, we had the wake in the house. Mr. DeVito brought my grandmother back in a casket, in a new dress. My grandfather died in 1948. I never saw her wear anything other than black. From 1948 to 1957.
Wow.
Black bathing suit, black. You wore black the rest of your life.
Wow.
She was in a blue dress.
Huh.
Her hair was done. She looked good. I didn't even recognize her. I said, Mama. And I said, you know, this is really something. And it stuck with me.
Huh.
It stuck with me all the time. So when I was in high school, we took a battery of exams, I think in the 11th grade or 10th grade, to see what you were most suited for. And we got the results back, and the guidance counselor called me down and said, Charlie, I want to talk to you about something. I said, okay. He said, you scored very high on social interaction.
Hmm.
I said, what does that mean? He said, well, you obviously deal very well socially with people. Okay. He said, you know where you scored the highest? And I said, no. He said, funeral service.
Oh, my goodness.
He said, did you ever entertain going into the funeral business?
Yes, yeah.
And I said, yes, I did.
Huh.
I said, but my family was not that excited about me going into the funeral business. They wanted me to go to Babson College, because, you know, I like finance and everything. And they wanted me to go to Babson. But I said, I think I want to go to combining school. He said, well, he said, there's a place in Kenmore Square, New England Institute. And he said, you send some information to them. He said, and I'll even help you with the process. And the rest is history.
Wow.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
Thank you.
But that's,
Yeah, that's great.
you know, that's how it happened. I mean,
Yeah.
if
Well-
it wasn't for my grandmother's death, I don't know what I probably
Yeah.
would have gone to Babson. Maybe gone into banking or something. I don't know.
Well, we're really grateful that people like you do what you do, Charlie, believe me.
Yeah.
And you do it very
But it is
professionally, too. Oh, no question
Yes, I
about
would
it.
imagine it would have to
Right.
be, yes.
And my wife and family have been through, you know, many nights, many Christmas Eves. I wasn't there, many Thanksgiving days, I wasn't home.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which leads me to a nice poem.
Father of sorts.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. When I visited Charlie, he gave me a nice poem. I think it would be very appropriate at a time like this.
That poem, okay. You did get the poem.
Oh, absolutely. This is a nice poem. I think this tells everything we need to know. Let me read it to you. The Undertaker. And it was written by, I went online and I found out who the was. It was written by a woman named Darlene Rush. Okay? The Undertaker.
And I always said, I prefer to be called an undertaker.
I know it, yeah. I mean,
We
people,
undertake everything.
yeah.
Yeah. From delivering cheers to the house to whatever.
There you go. Yeah. This is for the Undertaker, whose story is sad to tell. For what he does is never mentioned, and often overlooked as well. He's not at all what you might picture. He's not wrinkled, old, and gray. His face is not the pasty white like storybooks portray. Some people laugh and make their jokes, and some turn up their nose. And many think that he is strange for the life that he has chose. But there are many things that they don't see, and even more that they don't know. Like all the nights he gets no rest, but never lets it show. I've seen him work both day and night, and no time to eat or sleep, to care for those in mourning and comfort those who weep. The load he carries on his shoulders is more than you and I could bear, but he always seems to find the time to show you that he cares. So when you see the undertaker, make sure you see the man that does the job that no one wants and that no one understands. Take the time to shake his hand and a moment to just say hi. I think you'll find the undertaker is just an ordinary guy. And he sure is. And thank you so much, Charlie, for what you do.
That is nice. That's a nice poem, Jay.
And that's it.
Very good.
This program was made possible by your Franklin friends and neighbors, good folks just like you. Thanks for supporting Franklin TV. And thanks for watching.